The grinding sound of metal against metal still echoes in my ears when I think about that day. My old red tractor sat just inches away from Karen's shiny Porsche, its front loader raised like a weapon ready to strike. The only thing between 2 tons of farm equipment and her precious sports car was my conscience and maybe the fear of what would happen next. Before you watch full story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I could see my reflection in the Porsche's pristine paint job, a weathered farmer in dirty overalls, calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, sweat already beading on my forehead in the morning heat. The contrast was almost comical. Here was this $80,000 sports car, detailed to perfection, blocking the entrance to a barn that probably cost less to build than Karen spent on her monthly spa treatments. But this wasn't about money or status. This was about 20 head of cattle trapped behind that barn door, and a woman who thought the world revolved around her Instagram account. Let me tell you how we got here, because this story didn't start with a blocked barn door. It started 6 months earlier when Karen Palmer moved into Meadowbrook Estates, the fancy subdivision that had sprouted up next to my family's 200-acre farm like mushrooms after rain. I remember the day she first showed up at my front door. It was a crisp October morning, and I was fixing a broken fence post when I heard the click-clack of high heels on gravel. I looked up to see this blonde woman in a white pantsuit picking her way across my driveway like she was walking through a minefield. "Excuse me," she called out, holding a manicured hand up to shield her eyes from the sun. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" Establishment. Like my farm was some kind of business she might want to review on Yelp. "Yes, ma'am," I said, setting down my post-hole digger. "Jake Morrison. This is Morrison Farm. Been in my family for 3 generations." She introduced herself as Karen Palmer, my new neighbor, and launched into what I would later recognize as her standard speech about building community and maintaining property values. She wanted to discuss some concerns about my operation. The concerns, it turned out, were numerous. My rooster crowed too early in the morning. My cows were visible from her yoga deck. The smell from my compost pile was disrupting her meditation practice. She suggested I might consider transitioning to more suburban-friendly agricultural activities. I listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals, while mentally calculating how many generations of Morrisons had worked this land before Karen Palmer was even born. When she finished, I explained that farming is a 24-hour operation. Animals don't operate on suburban schedules, and perhaps she should have considered these factors before buying a house next to an active farm. She left that day with a tight smile and a promise to look into local ordinances. Over the next few months, Karen proved to be a woman of her word. She filed noise complaints about my rooster, dismissed. She tried to get the county to force me to relocate my compost pile, denied. She attended every town meeting, armed with PowerPoint presentations about modernizing rural districts and protecting residential investments. But it wasn't just the legal harassment. Karen had this way of making every interaction feel like a battle for territory. She would jog past my farm in her designer athletic wear, talking loudly on her phone about property values and agricultural eyesores. She would throw elaborate parties on her back deck, positioning speakers to blast her guests' conversations toward my house. She once hired a landscaping crew to trim the trees on her property line so aggressively that they killed 3 oak trees that had been there since before I was born. The breaking point should have been when she called the sheriff because my cows were staring at her. I'm not kidding. She filed an actual complaint because she felt intimidated by livestock looking in her direction while she did yoga in her backyard. Deputy Martinez, bless his heart, drove out to investigate this urgent matter of threatening cow behavior. He took one look at my gentle Holsteins, who were indeed watching Karen's morning routine with the same mild curiosity they showed everything else, and shook his head. "Ma'am," he told Karen, "cows are curious animals. They look at things. That's what they do. Unless they break through the fence and physically threaten you, there's no law against bovine observation." But even that embarrassment didn't slow Karen down. If anything, it seemed to fuel her determination to find ways to make my life difficult. She started documenting everything with her phone, taking pictures of my equipment, my animals, my property line. She kept a log of disturbances and violations that she planned to present to the County Planning Commission. The woman was relentless, I'll give her that. So when I walked out of my house at 6:30 a.m. on July 15th, the hottest day of the summer so far, and found her cherry red Porsche Cayenne parked directly across my barn door, I knew this wasn't an accident. This was Karen making a statement. But let me back up to that morning because the details matter. I had been up since 5 a.m., same as every day for the past 15 years since I took over the farm from my dad. My routine was sacred: coffee first, always coffee first, then check the weather, then head out to feed the animals. The cattle got fed at 6:30 sharp, the pigs at 7, chickens at 7:30. Animals are creatures of habit, and disrupting their schedule stresses them out. The weather report that morning made my stomach clench. High of 98 degrees, heat index climbing past 105. The kind of day that kills livestock if you're not careful. I had already made plans to open all the barn doors early, set up extra water stations, and keep the animals in shaded areas as much as possible. I grabbed my coffee mug, a chipped ceramic thing my daughter made in high school pottery class, and headed outside. The air was already thick with humidity at 6:30, and I could see heat shimmer rising from the asphalt road in the distance. It was going to be brutal. That's when I saw it. Karen's Porsche, parked at an angle that completely blocked the main barn door. Not just close to it, completely across it, like she had deliberately positioned it to cause maximum inconvenience. I stood there for a full minute, coffee growing cold in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. The barn door was 12 feet wide, designed for tractors and hay wagons to pass through easily. Karen's car wasn't just blocking part of it, it was centered perfectly to block the entire opening. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe her car had broken down or she had had some kind of emergency. But the Porsche looked fine, sitting there gleaming in the early morning sun, not a scratch on it. I walked around the vehicle looking for any clue about why it was there. No note on the windshield. No hazard lights blinking. No sign of mechanical trouble. The car was locked, windows up, air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror still swaying slightly from when it had been parked. That's when I heard the first sounds from inside the barn. My cattle, stirring and starting to vocalize. They knew it was feeding time and they were getting restless. On a normal day, I would have had those doors open 10 minutes ago. I pulled out my phone and called Karen's number. I had gotten it months ago during one of our neighborly discussions about farm operations. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Karen Palmer. I'm probably out living my best life, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when the universe aligns properly." Even her voicemail message irritated me. I left a polite message explaining the situation and asking her to move her car immediately. Then I tried texting her, "Your car is blocking my barn door. Need to feed cattle. Please move ASAP." No response. I tried calling again. Straight to voicemail this time. By now the sounds from inside the barn were getting more urgent. Cattle are smart animals and they knew their routine was being disrupted. More importantly, I could feel the temperature starting to climb. The metal roof of the barn was already beginning to radiate heat, and without airflow the interior would become an oven within hours. I decided to walk over to Karen's house, a sprawling McMansion that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought more was always better. The architecture was an assault of mixed styles: colonial columns supporting a Tudor roofline, Mediterranean arches framing windows that belonged on a contemporary art museum. The whole thing was painted in various shades of beige that probably had names like Tuscan Sunset and Desert Dreams. I rang the doorbell, which played an elaborate melody that sounded like it came from a jewelry box. No answer. I rang it again, then knocked loudly on the heavy wooden door. Still nothing. Karen's 3-car garage was closed, but I could see tire tracks in the driveway that suggested recent activity. Either she wasn't home or she was ignoring me. Given our history, both seemed equally likely. I walked back to my farm, my frustration building with each step. The cattle were getting louder now, and I could hear the distress in their voices. These weren't just hungry animals anymore, they were starting to panic. I stood in front of the Porsche again, hands on my hips, considering my options. I could call a tow truck, but that would take hours and cost money I didn't want to spend. I could call the sheriff, but as I had learned from previous encounters with Karen, law enforcement had limited power in property disputes between neighbors. Or I could take matters into my own hands. I looked over at Old Red, my International Harvester tractor, sitting where I had parked her the night before after finishing work in the back pasture. She was 15 years old with more than 3,000 hours on the engine, but she ran like a Swiss watch. The front loader was rated for 2,000 pounds, more than enough to move one sports car. But moving a neighbor's expensive vehicle with farm equipment felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Once I did this, there would be no going back to polite disagreements about rooster schedules and compost pile locations. This would be war. I tried calling Karen one more time. Still no answer. The decision was made for me when I heard a new sound from the barn, the deep, distressed lowing of cattle in serious trouble. The temperature was climbing fast, and the barn was becoming a death trap. I climbed into Old Red's cab and turned the key. The diesel engine rumbled to life with a satisfying growl that seemed to announce my intentions to the world. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, considering the magnitude of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about moving a car. This was about establishing a principle. Karen had spent months trying to make my life difficult, treating my farm like an inconvenience that existed solely to interfere with her suburban fantasy. She had filed complaints, threatened lawsuits, and generally made it clear that she considered my 200-year-old family farm to be a temporary obstacle that would eventually be removed for her convenience. But this was different. This wasn't about noise or smells or property values. This was about the welfare of living animals, and Karen had finally crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If I was going to do this, I wanted a complete record of exactly what happened and why. "This is Jake Morrison at Morrison Farm," I said to the camera. It's 7:15 a.m. on July 15th. The current temperature is 83 degrees and rising, with a predicted high of 98. My neighbor Karen Palmer has parked her vehicle directly across my barn door, preventing me from accessing my cattle for feeding and care. I have attempted to contact her multiple times with no response. I turned the camera toward the barn, where the sounds of distressed animals were clearly audible. As you can hear, the cattle are in distress. Without access to food, water, and proper ventilation, they could die in this heat. I'm documenting this situation for legal purposes before taking action to protect my animals. I set the phone on the dashboard where it could capture everything, then put the tractor in gear. The approach was slow and deliberate. I wanted there to be no question that this was a measured response to an emergency, not an act of rage or revenge. I lowered the front loader until it was just touching the Porsche's rear bumper. The contact was almost gentle at first, just enough pressure to rock the car slightly on its suspension. I paused there, giving Karen one final opportunity to appear and resolve this herself. Nothing. I increased the pressure gradually. The Porsche's frame began to creak as the loader pushed against it. The rear bumper started to deform, bending inward as the steel of my equipment met the aluminum of her car. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, a groaning, crunching noise that seemed to go on forever. The car began to slide forward, its tires scraping against the gravel driveway. The rear window spider-webbed as the frame twisted under the stress. The trunk lid popped open and bounced as the car moved. I kept steady pressure on the hydraulic controls, pushing the Porsche slowly but inexorably away from the barn door. The car left a trail of broken plastic and twisted metal as it moved. The rear bumper completely separated from the vehicle and clattered to the ground behind the wheels. I pushed the Porsche about 15 feet, just far enough to completely clear the barn door. The car's rear end was significantly damaged, the quarter panel was crushed, the trunk was mangled, and there were deep gouges along the side where it had scraped against a fence post during the move. But the barn door was clear. I turned off Old Red and jumped down, running to the barn doors. The wave of superheated air that hit me when I opened them confirmed how dangerous the situation had become. The interior temperature had to be over 100 degrees already, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. My cattle came streaming out like prisoners escaping, heading straight for the water trough in the shade of the oak trees along the fence line. They were clearly overheated and stressed, but they were alive. A few more hours and some of them might not have been. I was checking on the cattle, making sure none of them were showing signs of serious heat exhaustion, when I heard the screaming. "What the hell did you do to my car?" I turned to see Karen running across the field between our properties, still in her yoga clothes but carrying her phone like a weapon. Her face was red with rage and she was filming everything as she ran. "You psychotic redneck. You destroyed my car. Do you have any idea how much that cost?" She kept running until she reached the damaged Porsche, then began circling it like a crime scene investigator, recording every scratch and dent from multiple angles. Her commentary was a stream of expletives and threats that would have made a sailor blush. "This is assault. This is destruction of property. This is terrorism. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm going to sue you for everything you have." I stood there calmly, leaning against Old Red's front tire, waiting for her to run out of steam. The contrast was almost comical. This perfectly groomed woman in designer athletic were having a complete meltdown next to a mangled luxury car, while behind her my cattle grazed peacefully in the morning sun. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I asked the obvious question. "Where were you, Karen?" "What?" She looked confused, like the question didn't make sense. "I called you. I texted you. I came to your house. Where were you?" "I was at my Pilates class in town. It's only been a couple of hours." "A couple of hours?" I gestured toward my cattle, who were still clustered around the water trough, clearly distressed. Look at them. In this heat, another hour could have killed them. They're just cows, she said as if that explained everything. And there it was. The fundamental difference between us. To Karen, my cattle were just scenery, part of the rural backdrop for her suburban fantasy. She literally couldn't understand that they were living creatures who depended on me for their survival. Just cows? I repeated. These, just cows represent my livelihood, my family's legacy, and 20 individual animals who were suffering because you decided to use my barn as a prop for your social media photos. Photos? She blinked. How did you know about the photos? So you admit it? You deliberately blocked my barn door to take pictures. For the first time since she had arrived, Karen looked embarrassed. She glanced away, then back at her phone screen, then at the damaged car. I was taking photos for my Instagram, she finally admitted. The lighting was perfect and the rustic barn made a great background for my car. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Photos. She had potentially killed 20 animals so she could take photos for social media. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just negligence or inconsideration. This was a level of self-absorption that bordered on the pathological. You didn't think it would be a big deal to block the only entrance to my barn on the hottest day of the year? I didn't know you had to feed them so early, she protested. I thought I would be back before you needed to get in there. So you knew you were blocking the door? Well, yes, but I thought. You thought what? That farming runs on your schedule? That animals can just wait around while you take pictures and go to Pilates class? Karen's face crumpled slightly. For a moment, she looked less like an entitled suburban princess and more like someone who was genuinely confused about what she had done wrong. I didn't know, she said quietly. I really didn't understand that it was so serious. Now you do, I said. Karen spent the next 20 minutes filming her car and creating what I assumed would be a very dramatic social media post about her victimization at the hands of a crazy farmer. She called multiple people, her insurance company, what sounded like a lawyer, and someone she kept referring to as her social media manager. During this performance, I went back to my normal morning routine. The cattle needed extra attention after their stressful morning, and I had to check each one for signs of heat exhaustion. 2 of the older cows were showing symptoms, and I had to get them into the shade with extra water and electrolytes. By the time I finished, there were 3 vehicles in my driveway. Karen's rental car, apparently she had called for immediate transportation, a tow truck, and a sheriff's department cruiser. Deputy Martinez approached me with the expression of a man who had drawn the short straw. We had dealt with each other several times over the years, usually for mundane issues like property line disputes or the occasional complaint about farm equipment on rural roads. "Morning, Jake," he said. "I understand we have a situation here." I explained what had happened, showed him the video on my phone, and walked him through the condition of the cattle when I had finally been able to access them. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, and examined both the barn and the damaged Porsche. "What's the temperature supposed to hit today?" he asked. 98 degrees. Heat index over 105. He whistled low. Yeah, that would have been bad for them. Then he talked to Karen. Her version of events was creative. According to her account, I had viciously attacked her vehicle in an unprovoked act of aggression. She claimed she had only been gone for an hour, that she had implied permission to park wherever she wanted on adjoining properties, and that my response was completely disproportionate to the situation. Deputy Martinez listened patiently, taking notes and asking the same type of clarifying questions he had asked me. When Karen finished her dramatic recounting, he closed his notebook and looked at both of us. "Let me ask you something, ma'am," he said to Karen. "Did you receive any calls or texts from Mr. Morrison asking you to move your vehicle?" Karen's face went pale. "Well, yes, but how many?" I don't know exactly. More than one. Yes, but I was in class. I couldn't just. So you were aware that your vehicle was blocking access to his livestock, and you chose not to respond to his requests to move it? The silence stretched out for a long moment before Karen finally nodded. "And you parked your vehicle on his property without permission?" "I didn't think it was a big deal," she protested. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter what you thought. What matters is what you did." Deputy Martinez opened his notebook again. "You parked your vehicle on someone else's property without permission, blocking access to livestock facilities during extreme weather conditions, and ignored multiple requests to move it. Do you understand that blocking access to livestock during emergency conditions can be considered animal endangerment under state law?" Karen's jaw dropped. Animal endangerment? But they're just, she caught herself before finishing the sentence. Just what, ma'am? Nothing. I didn't know about any laws. Deputy Martinez looked at me. Mr. Morrison, in your opinion, were your animals in immediate danger due to the blocked access? Yes, sir. Without ventilation and access to water, cattle can die of heat stroke in less than 2 hours in these conditions. I've lost animals to heat before, it's not something you risk. He nodded and closed his notebook again. Here's the situation. Mr. Morrison had a legitimate emergency involving the welfare of his animals. He attempted to contact the vehicle owner multiple times before taking action. Under state agricultural protection laws, farmers have the right to take reasonable measures to access their livestock during emergency situations. He turned to Karen. Ma'am, you committed trespassing by parking on his property without permission, and potentially animal endangerment by blocking access to livestock facilities during extreme weather. Those are both misdemeanors in this state. Karen looked like she might faint. You're going to arrest me? Not today. But I am going to file a report documenting this incident, and I strongly recommend that you work out your property boundary issues before they escalate further. What about my car? She demanded. What about the damage he did to my car? Ma'am, he was within his legal rights to move your vehicle under the circumstances. If you want to pursue civil action, that's between you and your lawyer. But from a criminal standpoint, Mr. Morrison's actions were justified. After Deputy Martinez left, Karen and I stood in my driveway looking at each other across the wreckage of her Porsche. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, replaced by something that might have been shock or embarrassment. I really didn't understand, she said quietly. I thought farms were just like big yards. I didn't realize the animals could actually die. It was the first genuine thing she had said to me in months. They're not pets, Karen. They're livestock, but they're still living creatures who depend on me completely. When you block my access to them, you're putting their lives at risk. She nodded slowly, looking at the cattle who were now grazing peacefully in the pasture, apparently recovered from their morning ordeal. What do I owe you? She asked. Nothing, I said. Just don't do it again. I won't, she said, and for the first time I believed her. The tow truck driver finished loading the Porsche onto his flatbed and handed Karen a receipt. She stood there holding it, looking lost. I guess I need to find a different backdrop for my photos, she said. There's a nice spot down by Miller's Pond, I suggested. Good lighting, no livestock involved. She actually smiled at that. Thanks. And Jake? I'm sorry. I really am. After she left, I finished my morning chores and went back to the house for a second cup of coffee. The phone was already ringing when I walked through the door. It was my daughter Sarah, calling from college. Dad, you're famous. What? Someone posted a video of you moving a car with Old Red. It's all over social media. #TractorJustice is trending. I looked out the window at Old Red, still parked where I had left her, front loader slightly raised like she was ready for the next challenge. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I asked. Depends on your perspective, I guess. But the comments are mostly supportive. Lots of farmers sharing their own neighbor horror stories. Over the next few days, I learned what it meant to accidentally become an internet sensation. The video of me moving Karen's Porsche had been recorded by someone in the housing development, probably from one of the second-story windows that overlooked my property. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed more than 1 million times. The comments were a mix of support, criticism, and humor. Farmers from around the country shared similar stories about conflicts with non-agricultural neighbors. Urban viewers were split between those who thought I was a hero standing up for agricultural rights and those who thought I was a dangerous vigilante who had overreacted to a minor inconvenience. Someone created a meme using a still image from the video, with the caption, "Farm equipment, the original problem solver." Another showed Old Red with sunglasses and the text, "Deal with it." A local t-shirt shop started selling shirts with, "Don't block the barn," printed on them. The local newspaper picked up the story, interviewing both me and Karen. The reporter was clearly hoping for drama, but both of us kept our comments measured and civil. I explained the agricultural protection laws and the dangers of heat stress in livestock. Karen admitted that she had made a mistake and was learning about rural life. But the real change came in my relationship with Karen. A week after the incident, she showed up at my front door again. This time she was wearing jeans and work boots instead of designer athletic wear. "I've been thinking," she said. "I've been living here for 6 months and I don't actually know anything about farming. Would you be willing to teach me?" I was skeptical. "Teach you what, exactly?" "Everything. When you feed the animals, why you do things at certain times, what it actually takes to run a farm. I want to understand what I've been interfering with. It seemed like a genuine request, so I agreed to let her shadow me for a morning. I expected her to last about an hour before getting bored or grossed out. I was wrong. Karen turned out to be surprisingly interested in the mechanics of farm operations. She asked intelligent questions about feed schedules, animal behavior, and seasonal routines. She took notes on her phone and actually seemed to be paying attention when I explained why certain things had to be done at specific times. She came back the next week and the week after that. Before long, she was helping with simple tasks, filling water troughs, moving hay bales, even helping me repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Karen was still very much a city person trying to understand rural life. She still wore designer clothes to do farm work, though she had switched to clothes she didn't mind getting dirty. She still took photos of everything for her social media accounts, but now the photos came with captions about the importance of agriculture and the hard work that goes into food production. She stopped filing complaints about farm noises and smells. She started buying eggs, milk, and vegetables from local farmers instead of driving to the city for organic groceries. She even convinced some of her friends from the housing development to start a small community garden. Most importantly, she began to understand that farming isn't a hobby or a lifestyle choice. It's a business that operates on thin margins and tight schedules, where delays can mean the difference between profit and loss, or even life and death. 3 months after the Porsche incident, Karen bought a different car, a practical pickup truck that she said would be more useful for hauling farm supplies. When I asked what farm supplies she needed to haul, she grinned and pointed to a load of hay bales in the back. "I'm starting a small horse rescue operation," she explained. "Turns out there are a lot of abandoned and neglected horses in this area who need homes. I figured I should probably contribute something useful to the community instead of just complaining about everything." The horse rescue became Karen's passion project. She converted part of her oversized property into pastures and built a small barn. She worked with local veterinarians and animal welfare organizations to rehabilitate horses that had been abused or neglected. Within a year, she had placed dozens of horses in good homes and was being recognized by the State Humane Society for her work. She also became something of an advocate for agricultural education. She started a blog about her transition from suburban princess to farm advocate, sharing her mistakes and lessons learned with other urban to rural transplants. She organized tours of local farms for newcomers to the area, helping them understand what they were moving next to. The incident with the Porsche became a running joke between us. Whenever she wanted to take photos on my property, she would text me first with messages like, "Permission to photograph requested, no vehicles will be parked inappropriately," or "Photo shoot planned, barn access guaranteed." I still have the original video on my phone, though I have never posted it anywhere myself. Sometimes I watch it and remember how angry I was that morning, but mostly it reminds me that people can change when they're given the opportunity to understand. Karen proved that the biggest conflicts often come from ignorance rather than malice. She wasn't trying to hurt my animals or destroy my livelihood, she just didn't understand what farming actually involved. Once she learned, she not only changed her behavior but became an active supporter of agricultural communities. The whole experience taught me something about patience and education. It would have been easy to write Karen off as just another entitled urbanite who wanted the scenery of rural life without the reality of agricultural operations. Instead, she turned out to be someone who was genuinely willing to learn and change. That said, I still keep Old Red fueled and ready just in case. And I have never had to move another inappropriately parked vehicle since word got around about what happened to Karen's Porsche. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is with a gentle but firm demonstration of the consequences. Sometimes you have to push back before people understand that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that pushback becomes the beginning of understanding instead of the escalation of conflict. But mostly it reminded me why I do what I do. This land has been in my family for 3 generations and God willing, it will be here for 3 more. The animals in my care depend on me completely, and that responsibility doesn't pause for anyone's convenience or social media schedule. When someone parks between you and that responsibility, you move them, whether they like it or not. That's just farm life. Direct, practical, and occasionally involving heavy machinery. The way it's always been and the way it always will be. 2 years later, Karen and I were having coffee on my porch when a new family moved into the house across from her place. They had clearly come from the city, and I could see them looking around at the rural setting with the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty that Karen had once shown. "Should we warn them about the rooster?" Karen asked, grinning. "Nah," I said. "Let them figure it out the same way you did." "You mean the hard way?" Is there any other way to really learn something important? Karen laughed and shook her head. You know, I never did get those photos I wanted of my Porsche in front of the barn. Well, I said, looking over at Old Red Park nearby, we could always recreate the scene. Though I'm not sure your insurance would cover it a second time. Very funny, she said. But I think I'll stick to photographing horses. They're much more cooperative than luxury cars. As the sun set over the pasture, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I reflected on how much had changed since that hot July morning. The farm was still here, the animals were healthy, and I had gained an unlikely friend in the process. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the worst conflicts. Sometimes pushing back is exactly what someone needs to find their true direction. And sometimes, just sometimes, a blocked barn door becomes the beginning of something better than what came before. But I still keep the keys to Old Red in my pocket just in case. Because in farming, as in life, you never know when you might need to move something that doesn't belong where it is.